All right, it looks like people have kind of stopped trickling in. I really appreciate you all joining this morning. It's a pleasure to be able to host you for this session where we'll be exploring some of the new functionality in Sage Intacct. My name is Tim Holstein. I'm the director of the technology practice here at Maynard. I've been with the firm just a little over 2 years. I've had the good fortune to meet many of you, but I haven't had a chance to meet all of you. I hope in the coming months, we have that opportunity. I will tell you, when you see that invitation for the client appreciation event in the fall, we host one in the Lansing area and in the Grand Rapids area. We would love it if you would take advantage of that and join us, give us a chance to meet you in person and host you, learn a little more about you and your businesses. I want to remind you that everyone is muted. We'll be recording this session today. We want to encourage you to ask questions, but if you would drop your questions in the chat, we will take the opportunity to answer them probably at the end of the session. Without further delay, I'm going to introduce you to Wes Salisbury. Most of you probably know Wes and have had the good fortune to work with Wes. He's had a significant hand in implementing many of our clients' Sage Intacct systems. So Wes is a senior manager with the firm, freshly promoted, and we're excited to have him spend time showing you the system today. Without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Wes, make myself disappear, and enjoy.
All right, cool. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. So as part of the demonstration today, we're going to be covering some of the major updates that Intacct has made as part of its first quarter release this year. So this release has been live for a few weeks now. And really, there's a couple features that stand out as really major, in my opinion, primarily around processing AP with this new AP automation tool. And also some changes to the way that list views work in an early adopter kind of beta rollout currently. There are more changes that have been made, and we'll go through the release notes and I'll show you where you can find that. But as part of the demonstration today, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And Tim, could you just confirm that my screen is being shared appropriately here?
Yep, I can see it. Thanks.
All right, sweet. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure we were sharing and that I wasn't presenting on a blank screen. So pretty much the first thing I'd like to show you is, in my opinion, the most major new feature in some time is the AP automation bill entry tool that Intacct has put out there. So this is a feature where you upload bill images and bill PDFs into Intacct, and Intacct will process those and read those invoices to attempt to automatically input things like the bill number, the vendor, accounts, amounts, etc. So this effectively does the same thing that an AP clerk would go in and enter it manually. And we're not using spreadsheets either. We're just importing the bills as we get them from our vendors. So this is a feature that currently sits on top of Accounts Payable. So we go to Accounts Payable, we go to Bills. And really the only footprint that this feature has is it gives us this button, or two new buttons, one that says refresh and one that says upload. So upload is the button that we're going to use to upload these images. So this methodology of importing bills, or uploading bills, I should say, is I first of all say which location or which entity I want to import to. And I have these options where it asks me, do I want to generate a bill with a single line item that summarizes the grand total? Or do I want to get a bill with all line items with associated amounts and memos and all that good stuff? I personally think more detail is better than fewer details. So I'm going to choose this option here. And under here, we can either drag and drop the files that we want to upload, or we can just go to Browse Files. You can upload currently up to 30 of these file types at a time. We're going to do some kind of small scale processing with just a single vendor, but really this allows you to go through and do this for many vendors potentially. But pretty much the way I want to lay this out is this is a brand new vendor. I don't have any bills currently. I've never processed any bills for this vendor yet. This is a vendor that's set up in my instance of Intacct, but I don't have any bills yet. I'm going to go ahead and choose one to start off with. So I'm going to select this BESCO invoice 403 8597. All right, so it successfully uploaded the one file, and I'm going to hit create bills. So I've hit create bills, and I'm going to select refresh up here to refresh my screen. What happens immediately is any bill that we imported, uploaded in this manner, it gets dropped into the bills listing here in a state of analyzing because it hasn't figured out what to do with it yet because it's running its algorithms in the background to figure out who's the vendor, where's the bill number, where's the due date, where's the invoice date, and what are the line items. So there's a bunch of things that it's looking for. This process can sometimes take a minute or so. So we may need to refresh multiple times here to get to the end result. It's still working. It's moved it to a state of draft. It still needs to spend its time to come up with the dollar amounts and all those things. But one thing I'll note while it finishes up here is the draft state in the event where you're not familiar with it. Whenever you bring in something to Intacct as a draft, it pretty much means it hasn't posted anywhere. It can't be paid yet. It's not, it's essentially an unfinished transaction, which in this case, when we import bills in this fashion, they're all going to come in as drafts, which makes sense because when you import something, the computer is going to try to figure out what it is, but you really want a human to finalize it and say, yes, this is correct, and I want to post this. All right, so while I was talking there, it finished reading the rest of the information. So like I said before, it comes over as a draft, but you can see here that the machine learning algorithm was able to pick up the bill number, the date, the vendor, totals, all that. In order to get this posted though, and to train the data model to say, to train the data model to become more accurate over time, we're going to go ahead and edit this bill. And it will tell you if it thinks that it's a duplicate. I did some testing in preparation for this demonstration, so I kind of already, I deleted the bill since, but it still kind of thinks there may be a bill that uses this number, but we can just disregard that for now. But as you can see here, it's populated a date, vendor, bill number, due date, and all its line items. And it brings over the attachment as well. So one thing I can do here is if I click on this paperclip icon, it's going to open up my bill image in a separate part of my screen. So I'll zoom in a little bit while we kind of tab between the two different areas here. We can see that the date of 2/7 matches the invoice date on the invoice. The vendor is BESCO Water Treatment. And we can see the address as well. The bill number of let me zoom in a little bit closer there. The invoice number of 403 8597, that matches this. And even when we look at the lines, we can see that there is a line for $36, $84, $3.50, as well as a sales tax charge of $2.16. Let's go ahead and exit out of this to expand our entry screen again. So one of the cool things here is that it also pulls in the memo line for each part of the bill. So this is why I kind of selected the full detail option instead of the single line, so you can see the individual memos. But since this is the first bill that we've processed so far in this fashion, the machine learning algorithms don't know what to do with it. It's like, what account does this go to? What department does it get coded to? we haven't trained it at all. It did its best to try to figure out stuff on its own, but we haven't told it what this type of activity is for. So on this very first bill, we're going to say the account is office supplies, office supplies, office supplies for the first 3 lines, because these are pertaining to the actual good that we're receiving. But just for fun, on this final one for the tax, let's go ahead and use a different GL account for that. We'll use the other taxes GL account for that. And I'll just put these all to the same department. All right. So I've input this bill. I'm all done with it. I'm going to go ahead and submit this. So again, this was the very first bill that we processed using this AP automation tool. I'm going to go ahead and upload another one. And I am going to just run my same process again. But I'm going to run it for a second invoice and import this one. So we've already trained the data model on a single invoice. We're going to go ahead and process another one for the same vendor and see how it handles it differently this time. While we wait for this to download, are there any questions in the chat so far that that you'd like me to address, or does anyone have any questions?
Wes, there was just one question. Andrea asked, is the AP automation applicable when using the Intacct purchasing module?
Not as of today. Great question. Not as of today. It is on the short-term roadmap. So in the next couple quarters, Intacct does plan on releasing it for purchasing. So as of today, it's only within bills that are input into accounts payable, but the same technology, it's on their short-term roadmap to make it available in purchasing. So that's what we have coming up there, and I'm super excited about that also.
Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Tim, and great question. All right, so that time allowed the system to read in the invoice. This one right here for 3.3. Let's go in and edit this one then. So same as before. It detects who the vendor is, what the bill number is. We'll go ahead and pop this invoice image out so we can look at the lines here. So the bill number, again, 4045587, that synchronizes with this. When we look at the line items, this is a different bill. So in the line items here, we have one line for, I'm sorry, I scrolled over too far. I have one line for $22.50, then one for $28, and then one for $50. And that all matches over here. And notice here how the account has been tagged to office supplies because it detected, hey, the last time we had this bill, we coded these activities to office supplies, so that's where we posted. However, it was also smart enough, the machine learning algorithm learned quickly enough to detect that they charged us $1.35 in tax. That's a different thing than the rest of the lines here. So it recognized the fact that we like to use the other taxes expense account for sales tax expense. So that is another deal where, so in this go around, I don't have to make any modifications because the machine learning tool knew what it needed to do. So I don't need to do anything to it. I just need to confirm that it looks okay and then hit submit. So it really becomes kind of a flywheel type of concept here where you have new data gets input, it gets corrected if there's any changes, then it gets submitted and processed as normal, and it's just continually learning and becoming more and more accurate. One of the things that I was pleasantly surprised by when this first got released is just how quickly it learns. Sometimes when you hear about machine learning algorithms and how long it takes to train them, you hear some things about, oh, it takes a couple months for something to learn something appropriately. But as you can see here, we just corrected a single bill, and it was smart enough to pick up on the differences between taxes and non-tax lines. So one last thing I want to do before we pause for questions. I see a bunch of questions in the chat right now. So what I just showed you is just one method of getting those invoices into Intacct. The other method that I think is really cool is you get assigned an email address, a dedicated email address, which in this case, it's maynardgoodwayhealth@sagemail.com, because that is my demo environment's name. You can have your vendors, or otherwise you can send your attachments, your bill attachments to this email address and send those off. And then every few minutes or so, Intacct is looking at that mailbox to figure out, do I have new bills to process? So this removes the step that humans usually have to take to go in and download files from email addresses. So those are going to import in the background a little bit, just so we can take a look at those in a little bit. I wanted to pause again for questions. Tim, any questions that the chat has?
Yep, we have a couple of questions. First of all, Steve's asking, can you upload multiple PDFs at the same time?
Yep. So just for I wanted to kind of step through one by one just to show the learning rate. But in this upload functionality, currently there's a limit of 30, just because they probably want to filter off some of the more excessive, like 300. Like, yes, I'm trying to say currently it handles up to 30 images at a time, and you can do those in batches. You can do like 30, 30, 30, and that would process them all. It would just put them in a queue.
Great.
Yep.
Good. Thanks. Now this is the bonus round. This person has multiple questions embedded. Does the invoice have to be a PDF in order to download?
It does not. Currently, these following file types are supported. So PDF, JPEG, the two varieties of JPEG, TIFF, and PNG files. Currently, these are all the ones that are supported. But another thing to bear in mind is that this functionality is still kind of it's not in beta testing per se, but it's still kind of early in its development. I would say it's likely they add on more as the need arises.
Good, thanks. Can you still change the address if it's different than what's in your system already for a vendor?
Yep, correct. And really, from what I've seen, it really only reads the vendor name. So it looks up the vendor name, and then it finds that same vendor inside your instance of Intacct. So let's just say you could even do this. If you look at the invoice and then you realize, well, oh shoot, my address for this vendor has changed. It's not accurate in Intacct anymore. All you got to do, you can either go to your vendor listing and then just make the modification there, or you can just access your vendor from here and select view, and then you can make your edits to the address there. So it's yes. I'm trying to. Long story short, the answer is yes. You can change the address.
You can maintain it on the fly. Great. And then I think the question is, what if it's a completely new vendor? What if this is an invoice for which the vendor has not been set up in the system?
So if the vendor has not been set up in the system, it comes over into Intacct with no vendor. The bill still comes in. It's just the vendor will be blank. So that's part of the training methodology where an unrecognized vendor comes in, a bill comes in, it comes in with no vendor, but that gives you the opportunity to add that vendor and then post the bill to that vendor. And then the next time that invoice comes in or from that vendor, it knows who it is.
All right, great. I promise I'll get back to these other questions. Do you want to jump back to your demo for a minute and then we'll pause and take on there are a few more questions?
Yep. Perfect. Absolutely. Yep. For sure thing, Tim. And again, thank you for all the questions. These are all great.
Yeah, they're great questions.
So while we've been chatting, those two bills that we submitted by way of email came over as drafts as well. And as you can see, they both came over. Besco water treatment, invoice numbers came over and everything. And just like uploading it through the interface that we did first of all, everything pretty much remains the same. The attachment comes over. You can review the attachment to, just like you could do earlier, and with all of you can review attachments like you normally do. And it's still picking up the fact that even though there's not a dollar amount associated with taxes on the invoice, it's still recognizing the fact that the bill has, let me go ahead and open this up so I can prove it. It still has that line for, it's recognizing that there's no tax on this invoice, but it still kind of puts it in as a line because other runs have had taxes. So if you want to, you can just remove the lines that may have zero associated with them and then submit them. And again, that trains the model to become more intelligent over time, to realize differences that, like, this bill has tax, this one doesn't, exclude, it gets smarter to exclude the stuff you don't want it to have. But really, that's about it when it comes to the AP automation demonstration. Now, again, you can do this on a much grander scale. You can transact with many more transactions at a time than what I just showed you. And you can import 30 different bills for 30 different vendors if you wanted. But I wanted to really boil it down and show this is how it learns, this is how quickly it learns, and show you that in our relatively short time of going through this, we've effectively trained the system to pick up on this vendor's bills.
Great. You ready for a couple more questions?
I am ready.
If an invoice has a prior balance on it, will it exclude that?
Now it's a great question because it's sometimes it could vary on a vendor by vendor basis and how your invoices are laid out.
Right.
The first time you try to process it, it may pick up on the line that says balance due. It may pick up on that. And then after the first bill you process, it'll probably be smart enough to notice, like, oh, hey, I want to ignore this part of it. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I think Intacct has done a pretty good job of training its algorithms to ignore things like that. Because just to give you an example here, there's a lot of fields. There's a lot of fields on this invoice here that don't just automatically get pulled into the bill. It's like it's natively smart enough to know what should be ignored and what shouldn't be. Like this warehouse, this main warehouse doesn't appear anywhere on this invoice at all once it makes it over to Intacct. So they've already done some work to say, like, this should be filtered off and this shouldn't.
Great. Very good. Can you incorporate an approval process, or maybe talk about how you might incorporate an approval process?
Yep, absolutely. So in this particular demo environment, for the sake of simplicity, I just disabled approvals so that I could just show you just how stuff gets posted. But Intacct Accounts Payable does support approvals. So let's just say you wanted to have any bill that gets posted by an end user, it needs to be approved by the controller before it actually can get posted and paid. That's a native functionality inside of Intacct, which it works even if you don't use this. But yeah, as part of your core configuration, you can add approvers to AP pretty easily.
Great, thank you. Is it possible that the system recognizes the reference number and associates it with different cost centers? For instance, gas bills for separate buildings might use separate cost centers. Each building might have a different reference number from the vendor.
Yep. So as you introduce variables there, it may take more than one invoice to properly train it on all the different codes. But yes, as you input bills over time and you say like, okay, this type of expense with this tag goes to this department or this cost center and things like that, it may take maybe 3 or 4 bills to learn on instead of 1 or 2. But over time, yeah, it would pick up on that.
Great, thank you. All right, here's the $64,000 question. Is this extra or another subscription to have this? And what is the cost?
Sorry, thank you, Tim. So pretty much as of right now, this is free for the next 4 or 5 months. So this is free. We'll need to book an order for you, but it's free up until the end of September. After that, currently it's 50 cents an invoice for processing, which is 50 cents an invoice for processing is quite a bit lower than other third parties at this point. And it's also, if it takes a human multiple minutes to input a bill, it's going to be cheaper than their cost, which could probably be better allocated elsewhere.
Great.
But free for the next 5 months or so up until September 30th. And then after that, 50 cents a piece.
Good. I'm going to add a bonus question here. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship of this to payments by CSI that Intacct announced a year and a half or so ago?
From a technical standpoint, there's really no relationship. Even though they're all kind of integrated with the accounts payable module, they're not really dependent or related to one another.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially there's no relationship between the two, but they can work synergistically if you have both.
Right. And the payments by CSI is a completely separate service, something that you would subscribe to independent of this.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. And even though it's integrated with Intacct, CSI, that's handled by a whole third party, whereas this stuff that we have right here, this AP automation, this is administered and sold and licensed through Sage itself.
Very good. Thanks, Wes. Okay. Andrea is asking, how do we book an order? I'll just answer that one. You can send me an invoice, tholstein@mainercpa.com. Or if you've worked with Dave Henson or Tim Bograkis, you can send any of us an invoice and we'll get the process started. We have to configure the order on Intacct's portal. It has to go through a bit of an approval process. Wes, do you want to comment on setup?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's pretty much zero setup. Once you send us an email saying, hey, we'd like to subscribe to this, like what Tim said, I think there's probably some form you need to sign, but it's a zero cost thing for now. But pretty much Intacct enables the feature. Once they enable the feature, pretty much the only thing that changes is that you have this refresh button and this upload button added to Accounts Payable. And that's about it. It's the cool thing about this is it's effectively zero setup. It's just you switch it on and you start using it. And then the machine learning process starts where it learns your habits, learns how bills are coded, and then it kind of trains itself.
Great. Thanks, Wes. All right. What do you think? Shall we transition to something else?
Yep, absolutely. So this was kind of the star of the show. For me, it's obvious why it's the star of the show. It can certainly be a game changer for some organizations out there. The other thing I wanted to show you that's a not as impactful change update, but it's still really cool, and it kind of has ramifications for future changes. The other thing I wanted to get into is if I go into Accounts Payable, if I go into my vendors listing, currently today, it's your listing looks like this. And really, this is a general listing format across the entire system. But one thing that you may have noticed with the vendor listing is there's a button here that says turn on list beta interface. So one of the ongoing projects that Intacct has been working on as of late or over time is they're revamping all their list views to modernize those, make those a little bit more actionable. So just to give you some compare and contrast here, in the current vendor listing, we can create our custom views if we wanted to add in some more columns to our report here or our list view here. And if I want to search for a vendor name, for instance, in order for me to search anything that has the word properties in the name, I need to use these wildcard characters, these percent signs, and encase the word with those. And then when I do that, it knows to search for any vendor that has PROPER in the name. But if I don't use those wildcard characters, it's not going to find it because it's only looking for what a vendor name starts with, which may work just fine. But on the other hand, it's kind of tricky, right? So what Intacct has been doing, if I switch on this beta interface, is modernizing the way in which a brand new user interacts with the software. So overall, once I've hit that button, it does kind of slightly change the layout. It changes the color scheme a little bit. And to me, I think it looks a little bit nicer. But notice here that in these text fields where we can enter in our filter parameters, it says contains. So by default, I can enter in something like PROPER and hit enter. And it's going to look for anything that has that string of letters or characters in the name. So it makes it a lot more intuitive for a brand new person to go in and look for something. Whereas before, you needed to know what wildcard characters are, and the fact that Intacct uses a percent sign. In addition to that kind of basic filtering ability, there's a couple other cool features that are really nifty that they've added here. And again, this is in beta, so I'm sure they'll be adding more things. But let's just say we wanted to build a new list view that had something like ACH information on it. So I can go under this little gear here and click on configure columns. And then I just want to pull in my vendors that have some ACH information contained within their records. And I hit apply. So it actually looks like I don't have any vendors that have any ACH information. Yeah, I don't have any vendors that have ACH set up here. Let me pull in tax ID though, just because I think that one does have some data in it. There we go. So under the old list view methodology for Intacct, what you would have to do is you'd have to create what's called a custom view and edit that custom view in order to pull in new columns. Again, if you're a really experienced user of Intacct, you may have already known that. But as a brand new user, you may be asked, that's not abundantly clear. Like, how do I add more columns to my list? So with this new methodology of list views, the end user just needs to click on configure columns and then say, I want this one, this one, this one. And they can even search in this search bar for things that maybe have 1099 in the name. So if you want to build a list view, maybe based on 1099 classification, you can do that. One last thing I want to show real quick here, and then I'll open the floor for, we'll address some questions here, is by default, we have this list view, which is just a listing of all of our vendors in the system. And this is what we're used to today. But sometimes it's nice to be able to have a listing of your vendors on one side of your screen, and then on another part of your screen, you actually see the contents of that vendor or that bill or customer or what have you. If I click on this little, it looks like a little page icon here, what it changes the screen to be is it allows me to go through my vendors and click on my vendors here and it opens up the vendor card or the vendor record in this other screen. So here's the Department of Revenue, Boston Properties, ADP, and it opens up the vendor with all of its tabs in the other part of the screen. And then pretty much this is a great way to go in and view all of your vendors instead of going in and clicking into each one. And if I click done, it just takes me back to what I was working on earlier. So I do see some questions that came in. Tim, do you want to rattle those off for me?
I don't actually think we have any new questions. I wanted to make sure we got everyone's questions answered. So if we didn't get your question answered specifically, feel free to slam it in the chat again. But I think we answered the questions that were asked earlier.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Tim. I must have lost track of the number of outstanding chats up there. So
It's all good. I will answer. One just came in. My email address, I'll put it in the chat here, but also we will be sending a recording, and Wes's contact information and my contact information will be included in that email communication. But I'll drop my contact information in the chat right now.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you, Tim. And in general, if you have one way or another, if you want to send an email off to us in regards to enabling AP automation, if you send it to your person who you work with most closely, we'll get it to the right people who need to process it. So we'll get a process regardless. One thing I'll just note, it looks like a couple other chats are coming in, but one thing I'll note is that you don't need to do anything to enable this list view function. This list view function is just made available to everyone, and there's no cost or anything associated with it ever, because it's essentially part of a broader kind of reconfiguration that Intacct is doing of its user interface. Really, the big vision here is that all of the Intacct list views are going to be updated to this format, and then it's essentially going to refresh their layout for all screens.
Great. Thank you, Wes. All right. I just want to thank everyone for attending and just say that we truly appreciate your business. We don't take for granted that you have choices of who you work with, what products you work with, and we appreciate the confidence that you've put in Sage and Intacct and in Maynard to help you implement and maintain it. As I mentioned, the recording will be sent out toward the end of the week. Wes's contact information and my information will be there. And if you're interested in having us book the order and enable the AP automation, please shoot an email, and we will do our best to make it happen quickly. Thanks for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.